So, as I said, my name is Robin McHaelen. I'm the Executive Director of True Colors, and so we do education and advocacy for gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer, questioning, two-spirit, same-gender loving, pansexual, flexual, not straight, not labeling, straight-ish, straight so far, straight with options, straight but stuff happens, gender bending, gender blending, gender queer, bigendered, multigendered, and other sexual and gender minority youth. We work with teenagers, can you tell? And because we work with sexual and gender minority youth, we work with young people who from very early ages are often the targets in the schools that they go to. And that, especially if they're male-bodied, they can be targeted from very early ages. And so what I'd like to do is maybe even just sort of put out a proposition that a lot of what bullying is about, where it comes down to, in the place where it becomes physical and violent and becomes abusive, is often around issues of gender. So I want to sort of build that a little bit. So we know kids get picked on for everything, right? Kids get picked on because they have glasses or they don't have glasses, because they have the right shoes or they don't have the right shoes, that they're too tall, they're too small, they're too fat, they're too thin. You know, they get picked on for everything. But the places where it begins to really escalate is often around how they express their gender. Boys who are not masculine enough, girls who are not feminine enough. And that when you look at national statistics on all the way into, well into adulthood, that gay men who are identified, targeted for being gay, or thought to be gay, whether they are or not, are the highest victims of hate crimes by many times higher than anybody else. They're higher than lesbians, they're higher than people of different races and ethnicities, higher than people of different religions. So of all the targeted groups, gay men get targeted the most often for bullying that leads to an actual hate crime. So when you think about how does all this stuff develop, and I spent a little bit of time thinking today about, sort of the process where we go through this, and it sort of starts with, and this is just one idea, so this is not the idea, it's an idea, right? That I think a lot of this stuff starts with a bias, and bias, we often think of bias as being against something, but often it's towards something. So you have a bias towards something or a bias against something. You have a leaning towards or a leaning away from something. And those messages about who we should lean toward and who we should lean away from start very, very early in our lives. And so we start with sort of a bias. A bias becomes a prejudice or a prejudging and assumptions that we make about people based on some element of their identity. It has nothing to do with them as an individual. It has to do with some element of their identity. Prejudice is an internal sort of thinking, right? Discrimination is when prejudice becomes action, right? And that you actually act on the prejudice. But an ism is when prejudice and discrimination is inculcated into law, into customs, into values, into ideologies, and all of the ways in which we function as a society. There are many isms in our culture, and while they are not the same, right, so racism is not the same as sexism. Okay? But there are elements in common. And sexism is not the same as heterosexism, but there's a lot of elements in common. And one of the commonalities is that the messages about this, about what it means to be this, or what's okay or not okay, start at very, very early ages. And nothing starts earlier than gender. Right? That we start telling boys about listen, they did a study with hospital nurses where they randomly put blue and pink hats on newborns, right? And then they filmed the nurses. And what they found was that if it was a blue-hatted baby, they let it cry longer before they picked it up. And if it was a pink-hatted baby, not only did they pick it up sooner, but they comforted it like this, whereas the blue-hatted baby, they comforted like this. Right? So the message that boys are rough and tumble, right? And that the messages about what it means to be a boy and what it means to be a girl in our culture start very, very early in our cultures. And that for girls, there's kind of a long, free freedom period, right? So that if you're a 4-year-old girl who's into trucks, or a 7-year-old girl who likes to play softball, or a 12-year-old girl who's into sports, what are some of the words that people call you?
Tomboy.
Tomboy. And that's valued in our culture, right? That a tomboy, up to a certain age, right? A tomboy, so a girl who's a little bit masculine, that's okay. Now you get to puberty, you got to cut it out and girl it up, right? And if you don't girl it up by puberty, then people are going like, yeah, what's up, all right? But for boys, they've got to boy it up, they've got to man it up at 2 or 3. Someday you got to go to a playground. Try not to look like a stalker, but watch the folks at the playground with their toddlers and 2, 3, 4-year-olds. Right? A girl child falls down. The caregiver, regardless of gender, runs over, scoops her up, and goes, "You all right, baby? Right? You okay? Everything right? You okay? Oh, yeah, you all right?" The boy falls down. And they go, "You all right? Right? Shake it up, right?" They don't even pick him up. They don't even walk over. They like stand back 3 feet and they go like, "You all right? Right? Shake it off, right?" And that if a boy doesn't man it up by 2 or 3 or 4, he starts getting messages that he is not okay at that age, and the messages escalate year after year after year. They've looked at the research on what is a protective factor for gay, lesbian, bi, and trans youth, right, across the board. And one of the most protective factors for kids is the response of their families to their coming out. When their families are supportive, those kids are at no higher risk than any other kid for all the kinds of things that you often hear that gay kids are at risk for. For trans kids, that's not true. For kids whose gender doesn't, kids who are creatively gendered, right? Kids who are not traditionally masculine or traditionally feminine, families have much less of a protective impact because they're harassed in so many other places. They're harassed by their peers. They're harassed by their teachers. They're harassed by their uncles. They're harassed by cousins. They're harassed everywhere they go. They get messages that how you're expressing your gender is not okay. And in adolescence, in middle school and high school, this is such a profound masculine culture for many kids, that this idea that masculinity has to be a certain way, and if you're not a certain way, you're a fag. Now, they don't necessarily mean fag like in gay. They mean fag as in not masculine. And so they throw these messages at each other, and we were talking about it's like a hot potato. It's not even based on the assumption that you are attracted to other men. It's based on the extent to which you are masculine, the extent to which you master your environment, you're in charge of your environment, that you have control over girls, right? And that you can, there's all these definitions about masculinity. And if a boy steps out of that, somebody says, "Dude, you're a fag." And then that boy's job is to lob that fag off to somebody else as quickly as possible, right? So that it becomes a word that's bandied around, and you can be in classrooms or gym classes or in the hallways and hear over and over and over, "Dude, you're a fag. That shirt's a fag. That's so gay. That's a, and then you hear this over and over and over again, and that it's sort of built in to this culture of masculinity and how boys learn to keep each other in line. There's a saying, and actually the person who created this, and I will never remember his name, he didn't come out as gay until after he retired from the NFL. He was a Hawaiian football player. So some of you who are into sports will probably know who he is. I have no memory of his name. Anyway, he told 2 stories that I thought were really great. One time when he was playing football and he wasn't out, they were losing at halftime, so the coach says to the whole team, "Yo, you are all playing like a bunch of faggots and fairies and girls, except for you. You're the only one who's playing like a man." And they said it to the only gay guy on the team. And so after that experience, one of the things that he said was that in American culture, men are not so much raised to be men as to not be women and not be gay. And that those messages about undermining any of the things that we can see as feminine those messages start really early. And what we do with boys who are not traditionally gendered is we torture them from very early ages. And that's been our experience very often. I brought something that I wanted to, well actually, let me do one quick thing before I do this. I bet you, if I asked everybody in here could come up with a story of a time in your life that you were told you couldn't or shouldn't do something because of your gender. Now, maybe the people didn't say girls don't or boys don't, but you just knew it. Or maybe you wanted to do something and you were told you couldn't because of your gender. Give me an example. Somebody give me an example. Yeah.
My mother, who was from the Deep South, said that it wasn't seemly that women should appear highly intelligent. Should not be showing off their intelligence.
Yes, that women should not show off their intelligence. Great. And you know what? They did a video, a documentary in 2009. So this is just a couple of years ago. And one of the things, they interviewed 50 teenagers from around the country. And one of the things that was still an issue was girls were not supposed to be smarter than their boyfriends in 2009. So just so you know. And you had your hand up back there.
In high school, I took a career inventory type of thing, and I came out very strong for engineering. And my guidance counselor said, "Oh no, that's not really a good career for women. How about nursing?"
Yeah, exactly. So, listen, to tell you how old I am, when I first started looking for a job as a 16-year-old, I had to go to the right section of the paper, because the paper was organized by men's jobs and women's jobs. And there's some women and men in here going like, yeah, I remember that, right? That they were organized by what jobs. I would invite us to consider that there's very few parts of our lives which are not gendered. That, like, can you come up with any example? Sports are gendered. Boys play softball, boys play baseball, girls play softball, right? Field hockey, ice hockey. But girls get directed this way, boys get directed this way. Girls' jobs get this way, boys' jobs are this way. That toys, go to McDonald's. Oh my God, when my kid was little, we go to McDonald's and say, can I get a Happy Meal, hamburger Happy Meal? And they would say, well, do you want the girls' toy or the boys' toy? And I would say, tell me what the toy is and I'll tell you what I want. And they would say, well, is it for a girl or a boy? And I would be saying, tell me what the toy is and I'll tell you what I want. Right? And she'd be in the back going, it's a girl toy! I want the girl toy! Which is interesting. What I learned is, one, that parents always impose their values on their children. But also that most kids do grow up sort of typically gendered within that. That's not the issue. It's for the kids that are not typically gendered. Yep.
I coached tennis for a long time at my high school. And when it was a rainy day, guess who got the big gym? Not the girls.
Not the girls.
The boys' team. Right. And I complained and complained. No way. Right.
Because girls' sports are viewed differently than boys' sports, yeah?
I actually was just thinking about it. We actually went to high school together, and I didn't even think it was that sexist till you mentioned that, but I was a drummer, but I was the only girl drummer in the entire band. But I had to kind of deal with a little bit of the
Yeah. What does that mean that you're a drummer? And exactly.
You don't belong
exactly.
here, boys.
And it's interesting. I'm gonna go through this continuum just very quickly, because I know I don't have a lot of time. Just very quickly, because all of these continuums get collapsed together. We often think this is a piece of paper that you have out there, so you can use it if you want to. I want to separate gender really into 4 different categories. The first is sex, which is your body, right? Your internal and external reproductive organs, right? Your chromosomes, all that stuff. I can see yours right on the end, on the back there. Okay. So sex is your body, and we think of, if you're a male, you have, what's your chromosomes if you're a male? XY, and if you're a female, XX, right? But all embryos are female for the first 6 weeks of embryonic life. And then if a Y chromosome exists and it gets triggered, then the ovaries descend and become testicles, and the clitoris elongates and becomes a penis, right? Sometimes it doesn't happen that way. And so a kid has a Y chromosome, but it doesn't get triggered. And you know how they determine sex at birth, right? They go, it's a girl. They look at their genitals. If genitals look essentially as we expect them to look, they say it's a boy, it's a girl. So a child whose Y chromosome didn't get triggered, they go, it's a girl. And then at puberty doesn't happen the way they expect it to, and so is it a girl or not? It's an interesting question, isn't it? The only reason I bring that up is that even at the level of biology, there's huge amounts of human diversity around sex. So sex is your body. Gender is your internal understanding of yourself as a man or a woman or something more or different than that. And I would bet you that everybody in here who identifies as a woman knows in your deepest self that you are a woman. And that those of you who identify as a man know in your deepest selves that you are a man, and there wouldn't be a single thing that I could do or say that would change your mind about that, right? You know that. We don't know how you know it, but we know that you know it by about 2 or 3 or 4. Right? So gender identity is your sense of yourself as a man or a woman or something more or different than that. Gender expression is how you express that internal knowing. The vast majority of the time, we're assigning gender to people based on what we see on the outside. Because if we're seeing their genitals, we're calling 911. Right? that we're learning about who people are based on how they express their gender. And that's your clothing, how much room you take up. Women tend to take up less space. They've done studies on benches in this where if a woman's sitting on a bench and somebody sits next to her, she goes like this, and if a guy's sitting on a bench and somebody sits next to him, he goes like this. Right? And then the other piece is around sexual orientation. Is the fourth continuum, is who you are attracted to emotionally, romantically, and erotically, and we live it as. Well, let me do this part first. So gender expression and orientation often get collapsed together. So for example, what were the stereotypes you grew up hearing about what gay men do for a living? Fashion designer, hairdresser, right? What? Broadway, actors. Okay, what did you grow up hearing that lesbians do for a living? Truck drivers, sports, gym teacher was the one I grew up with, right? So you notice any gender things going on there? What are the stereotypes about what gay men look like? Pretty, well dressed, thin. How do they walk? Stereotypes. Now we're talking about what's real. We're talking about stereotypes with a little swagger, right? What do lesbians look like? Men, right? So all of the stereotypes about lesbian women is that they're like men. They do men's jobs, they look like men, they walk like men, and so on. All the stereotypes about gay men is that they look like women, do women's jobs, talk like women, and so on. So people are collapsing gender expression and sexual orientation. And so a lot of boys who are targeted at 2 or 3 or 4 about how they're expressing their gender, we have no idea what their sexual orientation is going to be. But they're being picked on and assumed to be gay because of how they're expressing their gender. I guess the last point I want to make about this piece here is that these are 4 separate continuums, and that people can be anywhere on each continuum. We live as if you have X, Y, you must be a man, you must be masculine, and you must be attracted to women. That's not how humans do it. Many humans do it that way, but many humans do it differently. Some people are born male but identify as women. And dress as women. Some people are born male, identify as men, are dressed masculinely, but are attracted to men. So in each continuum, people can be anywhere on the continuum. The problem is, if you are male-bodied and you do not fit this continuum, then you are going to be tortured from very early ages. And I invite us to consider that in intervention, that one of the ways that we have to figure out how to make a difference is how to intervene with the ways in which people are taught to express their masculinity. That we have to work with boys if we're going to figure out how to reduce bullying in school. Because although girls do bully, most often it's boys bullying boys, or boys being bullied because they're not man enough. So I will leave it there. And I went on longer than I should. I'm sorry.
That's all right. There was a lot of information.